I'm Rianne Coulter, curator at the Effie McWilliam Gallery in Banbridge, and this exhibition is Nana Reid and Gerard Dillon. Nana Reid was from Drogheda and Gerard Dillon was from West Belfast, and this exhibition started in Drogheda in the Highlands Gallery, who are cross-border partners. So we're delighted to welcome it to Banbridge. The exhibition really started with the idea of exploring Reid and Dillon's work through their friendship. This is a painting from the National Gallery of Ireland, and it's called Nana's Dream Castle. And it's a lovely picture in the context of the exhibition because it shows Gerard Dillon here and Nana Reid both painting in the landscape. And it's a landscape that we know is from the Drogheda area. This building and the castle is a house near Drogheda that Nana Reid's family had associations with. It's obviously partly fantastical as well because you have the sun in this black sky, but it's a lovely image showing how they work together. Both Nana Reid and Gerard Dillon painted very normal scenes of everyday life in Drogheda and in Belfast. There's a lovely image here by Gerard Dillon called Four Lovely Lassies, which is a scene from Belfast he would have remembered from his childhood or maybe going back and visiting the city. And you can see it's girls playing hopscotch, and he's used chalk just like the children would in the image. And Nana had also, she painted people at everyday work, so this is an image called Tarring the Shed, where these workers are doing something very normal and not something which is usually the subject of art. And it's quite unusual in Irish art for artists to paint urban scenes because the landscape is so popular. So it's wonderful to see these artists painting their own native towns and making them the subject of art. This is a particularly interesting image by Gerard Dillon. It's called Hands Across the Border, and I think it's very apt for this exhibition, which is a cross-border exhibition. It's actually a kind of a collage with wool. We call it tapestry, but if you look at it, you can see it's been made out of old jumpers and old, old clothing that's been unravelled and sewn together. And we believe that he actually just ran out of paint when he was in the west of Ireland. And in the 1940s or 50s, if you were in Connemara, there weren't too many shops nearby where you could buy good quality paint. So while he waited for supplies to come from Dublin, he started to just create whatever he had. And this is obviously drawing on Celtic imagery. And as we'll see further on in the exhibition, both artists sketched Munster Boyce and Mellifont and the high crosses and that kind of thing. So that's where that influence is coming from. Yeah, we have a number of pictures here actually that were in Venice. This is an interesting one called the Forest Pool. And on the back it has a sticker from the Venice Biennale in 1950. It was the first time that Ireland had ever represented, or ever been represented at the Venice Biennale, and it was represented by two women, Nana Reid and Nora McGuinness. That was very unusual at the time. And well, from Nana Reid's work, there doesn't seem to be any particular theme, it's just a selection of works at the time. And it did get both artists quite a lot of press, but many of the Italian critics thought that Nana was a man, because if you think of an Italian, the name beginning and end would be a man. So her work was maybe misunderstood, partly from that. If we move to some of the Celtic ones now. This is a very interesting image by Nana Reid. It's called The Good Go Up to Heaven and the Wicked Go to Hell. And for any of you who ever went to Dublin on the old road, this was used to hang in the Munster Boyce Inn, which was along the main road from Dublin to Belfast, and it was commissioned by the owner there. And if you look at it, you can see it actually has lots of imagery from Munster Boyce, and particularly the High Cross at Munster Boyce. These little images up here come from the High Cross, and she's mixed them all up. She's kind of taken images all over the place. There's even these little devils, which I initially thought were made up, but they too are featured on the High Cross at Munster Boyce, which is one of the best examples in Ireland of a High Cross. They're quite worn now, but it's interesting to think in her time they would have been a bit clearer probably, and she would have grown up in that area. The tower is also from Munster Boyce, and the architecture could either be from Munster Boyce or perhaps from Mellifont, which again both artists would have known very well. So it's an interesting image because it is taking all these aspects of Irish culture and making it very modern, which is something a lot of artists in the 50s really wanted to do, find a way of making Irish art, I suppose. If we move in here, we can see some of Gerard Dillon's Celtic images. This This is a lovely image by Dillon, which is from the Drogheda collection. It's called Fast Day, or Feast Day, and you can see these little monk-like figures, again relating to carvings and high crosses and that kind of thing. And people have often remarked that the monks look quite like Dillon because he had this big moustache and he was balding. So I think he was quite playful and he included himself in some of these images. This is a very well-known picture by Jared called Climb the Handstand from a Belfast collection. And this is a later work where Dillon started to introduce clowns into his work, and the clown became almost an alter ego for the artist and allowed him to do quite playful things perhaps he wouldn't have done otherwise. It's interesting because he's actually stuck lino blocks onto the canvas, so it's kind of a collage of different works. And there's a lovely little lino block print here of monks which relates to the Feast Day painting, and we also have a little print of it. So again, it has these little monks with the moustaches, and it's also recognisably Mellifont Abbey. So this is, maybe 20 years after he started going to Drogheda, and yet these things are reoccurring in his work. This is an example of how Dillon experimented in his art. This image, which is based on kind of West of Ireland imagery and Celtic imagery, actually includes sand into the mix of the paint, so it almost becomes like a carving. It's a very rough textured painting. It's a bit like when children would play with sand and water when they're in school, and he talked about this and he thought this was very exciting and experimental and an interesting way to create new work. It's also a little bit like some American abstract expressionism, which would have been around in the 50s and early 60s and filtering into English art, and you can see that he's splashed paint on and that he's really trying to find a way of making a very modern art which is still Irish. If we move into the last bed, then we have some more images of the West of Ireland. Let's just stop here and see this lovely little watercolour which is called Dillon and Reid Sketching in Connemara. It's by Dillon, and it's obviously an image of when she would have visited him in Connemara, and he took this lovely little record of it. So we have here a number of images by both artists that are based in the West of Ireland. A particularly beautiful one is Connemara Lovers by Dillon, and you can see the smiling moon, which turns up in other paintings as well. It's sort of a motif which he recycles over the years. You can also see in a picture like little fields here, or patchwork fields. You have the influence of Celtic art coming again, because if you think of a high cross where each part of the carving would be broken up and have an image in it, this is what he's doing in these paintings as well. And again, these kind of island scenes from the West of Ireland. The images in this wall are more typical of Dillon and Reid's work that is well known. And these are very expressionistic images, and you can see how the colours are very muddy and quite earth-like. And these images you either love or hate, I think, but you need to spend time with them to really see what's there. This one particularly is interesting because Dillon and Reid had a great interest in travelling culture and travelling people. And this is an interest shared by other artists like Louis Le Brocq and Jack B. Yeats. And this is an image called Keepers at Slieve Bray, and it's a traveller encampment at Slieve Bray, which is near Drogheda. And the more you look at it, the more you begin to see. So you can begin to pick out figures. There's a man sitting here, a woman with a child here, the river coming through. And I think Dillon and Reid felt that the travelling people had a very deep connection to the landscape and to the culture of Ireland. And in a way she expressed that through her painting, because you can see that the landscape and the figures are kind of merging, and there's a great harmony between them. And so this is something that she continued on in her work later as well. And if you look at it technically, they're very interesting because there's a lot of paint being used and being used with great energy, but then she's actually sketched in figures. So for instance, in this one, just called Spell in the Wood, you can see the figure is having a nap in the wood. It's been drawn on later with maybe the back of a brush. And so they're quite technically interesting and quite technically innovative, and very unusual for Irish art again, because I think both artists really made their mark on Irish art by being original and finding their own voice.